Open worlds. Love them or hate them, they're a fixture of AAA gaming. We can all name simply far too many of them off the top of our heads, and they're very polarizing things. They can be the best thing since sliced bread, but they can just as easily be a massive farce. You see, in open world games, your surroundings serve a greater purpose than to just be a backdrop. They've become a crucial aspect to the gaming experience, wherever they're applied. And from there, their own quality dictates whether or not they contribute anything worthwhile to the game in question. There are many examples of open worlds that don't pay enough attention to actually serving this function well. Some just about manage to do so in order to bloat the experience and fill a game with meaningless content to drive up engagement so a publisher can please investors with arbitrary numbers, obtained by tracking player activity where we probably shouldn't let them. But then there are others that really stay with you as well thought out, well enjoyed experiences, enhanced by allowing the player to just take off and exist in a game crafted with love and care. As open world games have become exponentially more popular over the years, and the technology has facilitated it further and further, it seems the games that actually do something impactful with that layout have become even rarer. In failing that, they get lost in the endless copy-paste open-world RPGs pumped out by one company or another, in which nothing truly feels original. That said, 5 years ago, Rockstar Games dropped an absolute banger. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a brilliant experience on many fronts. The narrative is utterly magnificent. It delivers humanity, grace, and thought-provoking emotional storytelling in the tragic tale of Arthur Morgan, as we experience his perspective of the dying days of the gang he's dedicated his entire life to in a dramatic prequel to John Marston's original story in Red Dead Redemption. And then visually the game was and still is mind-boggling. Even today, many games don't reach this level of fidelity to come even close to standing out. And that's not to say that Red Dead Redemption 2 is ahead of its time, it absolutely wasn't, as there are too many games that simply don't live up to the times out there to compare it against, and then other games get too caught up in trying to keep up with the times that they forget to actually be fun. And make no mistake, Red Dead Redemption 2 is not a perfect game, but it is one of, if not my favourite open world game. The thing that draws me back to this title time and time again, without fail, is not its narrative, as great as that is. It's certainly not its slightly sluggish gameplay or the horse-shitting mechanics, but the open world itself. That and making videos about it that people watch. That's nice. Red Dead Redemption 2 delivers one of the most fantastic open worlds that I've experienced for reasons I hope to put into words today. It's atmospheric, immersive, full of experiences rather than just content to tick off like a checklist, though there's plenty of that too, and overall I adore well-crafted high volumes of environmental storytelling, because that is truly where Red Dead Redemption 2 sets itself apart in a way that can be compared meaningfully with other games in other franchises developed by different studios and published by other companies. You see, outside of delivering an objectively high quality experience, the vast majority of things that make one game great might not work for something else. Every single fantastic gaming experience out there is ordinarily at least a unique compound of qualities prioritized to deliver the intended experience. Often that applies to two different titles within the same franchise, so the things that you can pinpoint specifically and say that other games need to do more of this, without explaining too heavily until your point gets lost in the wordiness, aren't that common really. You see, I was planning to do a mega retrospective on the entire shebang of Red Dead Redemption 2 to mark its 5th anniversary, but I decided against it because though a video like that would go exceptionally hard in these trying times, I realised a few things. Firstly, I don't have the time to put that together well, and secondly, I don't have the ability to stay on track and make such a project cohesive enough to release happily knowing I made good content. Third is that I recognise people have lives outside this video, and since most of that video would have hinged on this topic in particular anyway, why not isolate this talking point and deliver a more focused essay, if you will, on what's so great about this game's open world in particular. It also feels like the most increasingly relevant part of this game to me, A good open world isn't uncommon, but it's certainly harder to find something as organically player engaging and naturally thought-provoking in passing simply by being immersive and compelling, delivering the world in such a way that feels alive to an extent that justifies you sinking an ungodly amount of hours into it. And I've dedicated hundreds of videos to exploring the many mysteries, secrets and stories this game has to offer. It's safe to say it's special to me as it is to many others. And people always ask, am I sick of this game yet? And the truth is, yes, a little bit. But the joy of Red Dead Redemption 2 is that it's just so detailed that by the time I'd got to the end of my 250 plus video long playlist, I'd already forgotten the vast majority of experience I'd had, which meant I could go and explore them all over again. It's not that they weren't memorable, but rather I explored them with their respective videos in mind, making the experience far less natural. And that's just one of the many ugly truths of gaming content creation if your content extends beyond simple reviews when a game launches. You're going to be looking to activate specific things within the game and then trigger them reliably, which means often you're not actually gaming at all, but rather forcing the software to do something awfully specific so you can turn it off. So when it comes to playing this game, yes, I may have lost track of my actual playthroughs, in the sense that I have done many, but it is not uncommon to find somebody whose amount of playthroughs in Red Dead Redemption 2 eclipse mine easily. But anyway, I set aside an unhealthy amount of hours and got lost in Red Dead Redemption 2's open world, and the remainder of today's commentary will go over just why, to me, Red Dead Redemption 2 perhaps contains the greatest open world in gaming, at least out of the games that I've played. I'm not omnipresent, but I think you get what I mean. So the surface level, I suppose, is always a good place to start when discussing the qualities of a game, and I suppose that surface level entails the visual aspect, considering we're exclusively talking about this game's open world. Graphically speaking, Red Dead Redemption 2's art style is realism. It's obviously a game, and you can tell the difference between scenery in real life and the game, for now at least, but the entire idea behind the game is clearly realism and immersion, which is ordinarily a risky gamble for any game to do, considering that technology will inevitably be outdated, and the game that aims to be hyper-realistic will look aged. But 5 years on, Red Dead Redemption 2's open world is packed with graphically impressive scenery, complete with atmospheric weathers and vibrant but not too offensive colours. The world is layered in such a way that various biomes can be explored, from the freezing mountains to the moderate grassiness of the heartlands and the boiling desert of New Austin. These areas are visually unique and come complete with their own identities besides, experiences and atmospheres that work in tandem with the storytelling to evoke the feeling intended at every stage in the narrative. For example, at the very beginning of the game, we're found in the middle of a blizzard in the mountains. You can't see far in front of you, symbolising that you're not supposed to be too sure where this story is actually going. Better yet, we also don't know what's just happened. It's an ambiguous feeling for what's supposed to be an ambiguous, unclear time. In the Heartlands in Chapter 2 you get the grassy green open spaces that give you the feeling that this open world is going to be packed with opportunities. And then at the other end of the story, in the epilogue, when you venture down to New Austin, you get the feeling of, okay, what the fuck am I doing? The point is, the visuals are consistently good and yet adhere to whatever the story requires of them. It works, and we can leave that point there because the visuals aren't something I'm looking at, especially when judging this game's quality. The visuals are great and expressive, even if the idea was to go for realism, which can be quite random and unpatterned, and poor visuals certainly reflect badly on games, but I hardly look for a game on the basis that it will make my graphics card erupt into a ball of fire. What I am more interested in goes much deeper and revolves a lot around how the game presents its content and delivers that immersion factor rather than how a game looks. That said, I can't sit here and not address that 5 years on Red Dead Redemption 2 from a visual perspective holds up perfectly. Not that you necessarily needed me to say it. So let's talk less about visuals in a vacuum and move on. I suppose the next big obvious thing is that every single game needs a vessel through which we explore it in all of its facets, and that is ordinarily the protagonist. In this case we have Arthur Morgan, and what a character he is. Arthur doesn't become a husk under our total control when we take off and stop engaging in cutscenes. He actively has things to say. He's a sarcastic, introspective character who's always got something to say as far as the story is concerned, so why would that be any different going into the open world? Taking off on your own and enjoying the world for hours on end suits the character, and there are plenty of interactions that allow him to remain a character in this time frame. Sometimes he just comes out with things based on what's happening, such as making comments when clearing out a small camp of O'Driscolls. You can also greet/antagonise people at random and engage with the world in ways that require Arthur to retain his personality, even if what we're doing is a million miles from continuing his actual story. He also has a journal in which he documents much of what you might encounter, and that helps validate it as relevant to the overarching story, even when they absolutely aren't. This is because engaging with the world is one of the ways where we as players actually bond with him, and that's the main point in going from place to place, engaging with random encounters, side missions, bounty hunts, and so on, at least at first. It's because it deepens the vast pool of qualities that Arthur possesses and further contextualises his story by providing us with so much more as optional content and detail that provides an awful lot of depth without ever feeling mandatory, and those added dimensions help sell the believability of the story because Arthur Morgan feels like he exists within this world and hasn't just been slapped on it. And that in turn makes the main narrative more rewarding, but also makes sense if you just blasted through it. And while I'd argue blasting through the narrative does cheapen the experience an awful lot, it's still a competent, if not brilliant, main storyline that's long enough to feel complete when you finally put the game down. That said, we're rewarded with rich, juicy lore, storytelling and character development that you might not have otherwise noticed simply by being attentive, taking your time and going through the world at the pace that feels right for you. The story then accounts for what you have been doing and haven't in the world space, with plenty of opportunities for moments to be expanded, which only really occurs if you do particular but not overly specific optional things, and various moments pivot to make an impact based on what you'd reasonably be expected to know based on what you've actually done. And on top of that, there are off-ramps from the main story into the side content that you can choose to either do or completely ignore, and that's great too, but my point is you don't miss out on anything as far as quality is concerned based on how you play the game. If you don't bother with the side content, some of the experiences you have in the main story will factor in the things you have actually done, but if you do bother, you get something else that fits Arthur as a character across the entire playthrough and not just decided by fixed story moments. It's not terribly deep and these moments are typically fleeting, but it's a nice touch. Anyway, Arthur Morgan as a character is a topic you could dedicate over half an hour to an hour's worth of video to, if not more, just breaking down and talking about. He's not a character you become when you play the game, he's very well self-defined.
You're getting old. Old and kinda sad. No wonder they all leave you. You sour-faced idiot.
But what he feels like is a real human being that exists, and that is a fixture of the entire game, excluding maybe the epilogue for obvious reasons. Our influence over him is largely limited to a linear morality scale. We get good honour for morally righteous decisions, and we get low honour for less than savoury ones. Granted, the game is skewed diagonally here. You're encouraged to go the honourable path, but it's easier to lose honour than it is to gain it. You could gain it simply by interacting with the world in passing for the most part. Most decisions come through how you handle side content, how you interact with random encounters, how you conduct yourself in built-up areas, or interacting with otherwise inconsequential NPCs. And you could lose honour by accidentally running somebody over with your horse, which is easier than it sounds. On top of that, deliberately dishonourable actions will result in a loss of honour. However, what I respect most about this system is how it allows you to be in touch with the theme of redemption that is so prevalent in both these games that it's literally in the title, and how that's actually applied to the character. This way you can get a taste of both honourable and dishonourable actions in one playthrough, as Arthur not necessarily betters himself but becomes much more in touch with what he actually wants to do and who he actually wants to be, instead of just being an enforcer for the ideals of his mentor and leader. Early on you can go not necessarily the full dishonourable path, but you can certainly wobble in the neutral zone quite easily before things lose touch with Arthur as a character in the plot, because he's never a fully bad man, but there are times where it's made clear he isn't necessarily a good one from jump either, at least in how he behaves. So though you can't massacre an entire town, lose all your honour and feel your actions are appropriate for Arthur Morgan, despite being fully able to massacre the innocents in a town if you so wish to do so, you can refuse to help people, accept rewards where you perhaps shouldn't, steal from people who don't deserve it, and beat the daylights out of people to settle debts and other disputes. And that is attached to the story and the open world, and it does have an impact on how certain main story events play out. The main story itself, I suppose, is therefore a minor passing talking point, in the sense that it doesn't occur on the world but rather in it, which is my way of saying, similarly to how Arthur Morgan takes the world into account and vice versa, the narrative does the same thing. And sadly there are a lot of open world games out there that don't do this, at least not as well. But I suppose the point I want to make out of it is Red Dead Redemption 2 is very much so a package in the sense that the storyline does not occur separately from the rest of the game, which sounds like a completely ridiculous thing to say, but the entire experience of everything you can do in this game is one cohesive thing. No one aspect significantly subtracts from anything else, it all exists in harmony. So when I'm talking about the main story, what I'm actually saying is what's been labelled as the main story, because though it fits that bill excellently on its own, it also reaches out into every other thing you can do in this game, at least when taking into consideration the vast majority of the side content anyway. The most obvious form in which that's delivered are the stranger missions, effectively side missions of varying degrees of wackiness, in which Red Dead Redemption 2 truly embraces its more parody aspects, but also delivers storytelling that supplements the story of Arthur Morgan by expanding it far beyond the narrative of the main story. The main story of Red Dead Redemption 2 is broke down into 6 chapters, followed by 2 chapters of an epilogue. It's ridiculously long, yet justifies its length and delivers a heartbreaking story where we see the Van der Linde gang collapse under the pressure of existing in a world that in various ways has evolved beyond them. Arthur Morgan, as the focal point, serves as the main protagonist, the eyes through which we see the descent from a sturdy family unit to a disjointed gang of outlaws on the run from the law, and ultimately to the breaking point where everything changes forever. The storytelling is slow-paced, which is a criticism I've seen crop up time and time again, but that structuring allows for incredible details. The narrative is enriched by the optional content you can find when out on the go that is facilitated by moving along slowly. Some stranger missions will play more directly into this story than others, and there's more content than that besides, but everything is believably connected to the story being told, not necessarily in the contents of it, but in just simple coexistence. Is it always that cohesive? No. Being able to attack an open world in any order can ensure different players can give different answers to whether or not they found this connection to be cohesive, and sometimes there is some disjointedness between the subjects the narrative tackles versus the subject matter of what you're actually doing out in the world space. It's just a casualty of being an expansive open world and cannot always be mitigated completely. But like I said before, the point is you can just blast through the 8 total chapters of the game from start to very finish. There's so much more though to the overall experience to reward your engagement should you choose to engage with it, and yet it never feels forced upon you. The stranger missions are the perfect opening example of that, because they're ordinarily very self-contained stories you happen upon in passing. Sometimes they can feel significant for one reason or another, but other times they're just amusing, entertaining, or otherwise unique experience to be had as you go along and nothing more, exploring themes that deviate from what you're exploring in the main storyline, or perhaps exploring it but in a different light and context. Perhaps they play more so into Red Dead Redemption 2's parody aspects. or they might go the alternative tragedy route, both of which are accounted for well within the very concept of the game. Arthur engages with these stories believably and they fit into the structuring of the game due to that slow pacing. Then the game rewards you for engaging with these particular missable experiences, ensuring you spending extra time to truly dissect what Red Dead Redemption 2 has to offer doesn't go amiss. This works so well in part due to the inherent slow pacing, meaning going off and exploring for a few hours between main story missions is not only not out of place, but actually makes sense on more than a handful of occasions. Not always, but certainly often enough. That means there's room to expand the story through the side content, and as such justifies the open world aspect of the game existing in the first place, and these are elements of meta commentary that a lot of open world games out there don't even consider. And that's going to be a recurring theme. Many open world games are open world because that's what games are now, rather than actually justifying why they contain these open worlds, and that isn't always a bad thing, but sometimes it can be. If an open world feels pointless, I often find myself exhausted by it, instantly. When there is a point, however, I love every second of it, and this game has a point in almost everything, apart from the horse shitting mechanics. Where did you get all this poo? The stranger missions provide life to the world we're in by introducing us to characters largely irrelevant to the main storyline, though some feed into the narrative thereafter, in Brother Dawkins and Sister Calderon's case, or maybe Edith Downs and her son later into the game, but each interaction in this facet feels like it comes with some reward, whether it's something material like weapons, a cool hat, or maybe even a horse, or just the experience of being involved with the world and its own development in passing. This side mission format is great, albeit hardly holds an open world up on its own. Many would leave it here and pepper the rest of the game with collectibles and be done with it, and there are plenty of those, don't get me wrong. However, Red Dead Redemption 2 goes even deeper still. Far and away the greatest aspect to Red Dead Redemption 2's world is its ability to keep you on your toes regardless of where you are or what you're doing. You may be choosing to participate in activities knowingly, and there are various things to be doing that range from mini-games to robberies, simply fishing because you can, and so on, all the way to encountering things randomly as you travel between one place and the next. Negative space exists in abundance, but in this game you never truly know when something might occur. Maybe a man emerges from the shrubbery having suffered a snake bite, giving you the option to give him a health cure or suck the venom out of his leg, creating for an awkward scene. Then later on you might encounter that very same man again in a town who offers to buy you something from the general store as a thank you. Then later he might be out in the bushes again having been bitten by yet another snake. I can only assume he's a serial offender. As another example, you may encounter a woman whose horse has sadly died, and offer her a ride back home, in which time she tells you a story about the ranch she's been working at, one you can validate by simply exploring that location upon your arrival. You may free some prisoners from a transport wagon or rescue a fella from bounty hunters, only for him to give you a robbery tip. You may even happen upon a pig farm in which an incestuous couple poisons you and steals your hard-earned money, meaning you now have to kill them to retrieve your finances. You may be attacked by rival gangs and other kinds of outlaws as you traverse the world space, leading to massive shootouts, or discover a gang camp and clear it out with precision and finesse, or in my case, not. Or you might just be exploring somewhere only to be completely caught off guard by something entirely unexpected. Red Dead Redemption 2's encounters are heavily scripted, granted, but they help keep the world feeling alive and allowing you to experience things in between one big objective and the next, to the point where you can truly get lost gallivanting. The world understands this and also attempts to bring it full circle. If you avoid camp for too long, maybe a fellow gang member will track you down to check on you. There is always something happening not far from where you are. And when you're tired of exploring, you can return to camp where interactions go through the roof. You can overhear all kinds of dialogue while sitting around a fire, engage with songs by singing along, playing games such as dominoes or five-finger fillet, or is it fillet, like fish? I don't know which it is. Maybe characters will have things to say to you, maybe there are conversations already occurring that you can inject yourself in, and secrets to be found just laying around camp. The lore and world building in this small space alone is phenomenal. These characters are humanized by being presented in a way that they exist beyond their in-game function, or at the very least appear to. You can also engage with chores, which I didn't realise until my third playthrough at least. Away from camp though, the game strives to feel even deeper, with many hidden secrets and examples of environmental storytelling peppering the entire world space. Some are simple Easter eggs, but others, with no mission markers or prompts, tell full-blown stories waiting for the player to discover them, and the list on this front is utterly endless. Exploring the world is rewarding because every time you venture out, you stumble upon something unique, something fresh, and in failing that, something with a material reward for the player to use, such as a fancy weapon or piece of clothing that you can only acquire by involving yourself in the environment this deeply. And it's these environmental storytelling aspects that are perhaps my favourite. They're fashioned as points of interest, but they can often go beyond even that. Some are self-contained to the locations you find them in, others are interwoven into full-blown mysteries that span several locations, others have implied lore found at different locations entirely separate. Or maybe something's expanded upon by information you might be able to read in a letter or the newspaper. And these stories exist in all forms along that gradual scale, meaning that some of these stories are great introductions to go and find others, which means that others can be confident that players will pick up on details that might not be so straightforward to locate. A lot of those mysteries will have payoffs if you pay enough attention, and then others will just trail off, leaving the answers to your questions entirely ambiguous. And then other times it gives you a nice mixture. These encounters can venture over to the wacky side of things, sometimes going as far as being horrific, such as the man-made mutant found in a house near Van Horn. I think it's a South Park Easter egg, but it's still rather shocking. Then there's the fact you can hunt a serial killer. Though it's technically a side mission, it presents itself as environmental storytelling until you start actually piecing it together, and the game gives you no prompts for that. Then there's the Vampire of Saint Denis. For a game rooted in realism, it's peculiar that you can hunt a vampire. Outside the fella's looks and the fact there are bat wings on his remains, the game keeps it ambiguous, but it's heavily implied that this man is a vampire.
I'll suck you dry.
It's obviously another Easter egg, but it's rooted in the in-game storytelling, and that to me is phenomenal. Ordinarily, but not always in games, Easter eggs are often slapped on as inside jokes or references to other material in ways that may make sense in the context of what else is going on, but also sometimes can be a bit awkward and random in placement to the point where they actually stand out. But in Red Dead Redemption 2, often Easter eggs are rewards for engaging in a mystery that the game acknowledges as a broader part of the world design. So the game is absolutely crammed in Easter eggs, but it still sells the believability of the world of Red Dead Redemption 2 and make you feel as if it doesn't revolve around you as the player, because the truth is you want to be in the world, not on it. There are some Easter eggs that still stick out a fair bit. I mean, you can quite literally see 2 UFOs in 2 entirely separate locations, and you can also meet what is implied to be a time traveller. And then there are other supernatural mysteries such as the Strange Man, this otherworldly entity that only seems to reveal himself to John Marston in both this game and Red Dead Redemption, leaving a very ambiguous footprint that allows players to interpret him however it best fits into their perception of the game they're playing and its core themes. This is by far the best thought out mystery in the game because it carries over into both games. But also Rockstar demonstrated an understanding of never getting too carried away to the point where we travelled so far down the path of exploring the mystery that the mystery dissipates. Therefore, the amount of stuff you can discover, analyse and then theorise about in this open world in particular is absurd in its quantity. It makes exploring this game such an absolute pleasure, such a treat, something to look forward to every time you fire it up, because you can never quite tell where you'll end up going unless you've done about 10 playthroughs and know the game like the back of your hand. But at that point there are a few things that need to be addressed before we start considering finding ways to get more content out of Red Dead Redemption 2. So the points of interest, the environmental storytelling and the mysteries become yet another layer, if not several layers, in which this open world diversifies its content beyond simple checklists that get boring after 15 minutes and collectibles. No matter where you are in this world or what you're doing, you're never far from an encounter, an abandoned shack with a unique story to tell, a stranger mission or a legendary animal, a unique horse, a collectible that plays into a mission, a bounty hunt to immerse yourself in that Wild West fantasy, or a whopping mystery that racks your brain for hours. Maybe you think sod it and go and do a treasure hunt or go collecting penny dreadfuls and cigarette cards. Then, when all that exploring loses its magic for a bit, you can venture into a town, get shit-faced in the saloon, rough up some certified hard bastards, buy new clothes, stay in the hotel, have a questionable bath, customise your guns, stay the night or even set up camp somewhere and cook some lovely scran or watch a movie or a show. You can even greet or antagonise NPCs at random, interacting with them in simple passing small talk. My favourite is the combination of greet, antagonise. Not only does it add character to Arthur, the shit he comes out with can be hilarious. Then there's the fact that Arthur keeps a journal that you can opt to read. It goes over his experiences not only in the story but points of interest he's found along the way, strangers he's helped, other bits and bats. It's pretty fun to flick through and read, taking time to soak in that optional content to provide more depth for the story being told and the character whose perspective we're sharing. It's a priceless touch. There are so many layers to even this topic that if I sat here and listed absolutely everything you could do in the open world of Red Dead Redemption 2 in depth, the video would probably wind up being longer than if I analysed the main storyline frame by frame. And that would just be beyond what's possible for me. Even making this video alone is probably pushing the limits of my abilities. God, I hope it makes sense. But where all this side content makes the open world of Red Dead Redemption 2 so great is in the contrast between that and just cruising through the world in negative space with nothing happening. It's satisfying because you never quite know when that might be interrupted by a passing random encounter, a shack to investigate, a cave, a legendary animal, or even aliens. But you know that eventually something will happen that will put you right back on your toes for a bit. The game embodies the harmony of being alone but not lonely. You're never isolated no matter where you are, and there's always something to do outside running to the next main story mission to get it over and done with, at least outside the Guarma chapter, which has its negatives and positives, but I'm sure a later deep story analysis might shed some light on that in more depth than I'm prepared to go into here. It's not a perfect open world, I've never seen one of those. Like I said, at times what you're doing in the world is a little bit disjointed with the themes of the narrative on a gameplay level. For example, pretty quickly you might stack up a heavy amount of cash, and the story hinges on the point that Dutch needs money to get good and lost, but I just donated 50 grand to the camp box. In 1899 that would have the purchasing power equivalent to nearly $2 million today. It is the simple things that can't be helped, I guess. And the game clearly favours honourable decisions over dishonourable ones, and trying to play dishonourably will no doubt lead to a more confusing narrative at times. That said, the game does try, albeit a tad wet-willy, to address that. Then there's the entire horse naming shenanigans. It's a mature rated game. Why is there a profanity filter? I get that it's to catch slurs and to stop people naming their Tennessee Walker Hitler, but what are the moral ramifications of me naming my horse Fuckhead? Because that's exactly what it is when it keeps crashing into trees. The positive flip to that is you need to come up with a creative way to cheat the system and sneak something abhorrent in there if you really must. As a result, over the past 5 years, my horses have had many peculiar names. We've had Megatron, Optimus Prime, Dugas Fugas, Kevin, and I've discovered some particularly obscure, abhorrent people whose names don't flag in the profanity filter too. But apparently some really benign things get caught in the filter too, such as attempting to enter the name Jerry. I've already ranted far too long about this, and I'm about to expose the sick depths of my cruel, twisted sense of humour. I should probably stop doing that and return to God. Another flaw, random campfire encounters. 9 times out of 10, the happy camper sees you approaching and wants to shoot you for no reason other than because you're present. The other one time you get a cool conversation in which you learn lore about the universe that can be vindicated with real locations within the world space that either prove or disprove what's being told. Those rarer occasions can be pretty sweet, but you have to weigh up the more likely scenario of getting shot in order to experience them. And then the region of New Austin is another flaw within itself. It feels a bit super glued on, but not quite fluid. Even the world map looks wonky as a result of its inclusion. It's like cut content that wasn't uncut. It serves a minimal purpose in the epilogue chapters, but otherwise isn't at all remotely necessary. It's nice for the nostalgia, make no mistake, but it very much so feels like a more sparse area in both expected and unexpected ways when compared to the rest of the map. There's still plenty to find, but even then much less to actually do. The region conforms more to the open world format that doesn't quite go the full way in making the game feel lived in and alive, yet it's still not bad, it's just odd compared to the rest of the game. I feel as if it's meant to satisfy our younger selves by showing us how that portion of the map would look in this game, above all else, because if Rockstar didn't slap it in, players would just harangue them for it forever, and even that argument doesn't feel quite true to me, because I've never seen a publisher, and perhaps more accurately parent company, ignore its fan base happily time and time again, quite like Rockstar and Take-Two. Then there's John Marston. See, in the epilogue we take control of John, and well, he looks nothing like John at all. He has John's face and the ballpark of his hair colour, but the body of Arthur, and the world doesn't really adjust to him. There are differences as the epilogue is 8 years later, so buildings under construction in 1899 and now complete in 1907, but there's no real content specific to John himself. There are certain stories you can only complete / wrap up as John, and there are interactions unique to him that require you to engage with the world to a fuller extent than just the story with Arthur to realise, but that's kind of it. A lot of the side missions you can do as Arthur, you can do as John, which would be fine, but the dialogue remains largely the same. The issue is, Arthur and John are two very different personalities. You hear John's voice, you see his face, but he has Arthur's body and personality. It's really odd. It's redeemed by the various interactions you can have that are unique to John in the game, but there is another issue. You can start some side mission chains as Arthur Morgan, but due to constraints on where he can go for story reasons, you can only really complete them without the aid of mods as John Marston. So for example, for most players, Deborah McGinnis will be waiting 8 years for Arthur Morgan to gather her dinosaur bones dotted across the map, only for John Marston to show up come the end. The continuity is slightly skewed, but I think that's down to cut content when that occurs, which is not the norm but can be reliably observed. But more on that in a moment. The game is also incredibly reactive to you, which obstructs immersion at times. You see it's slow-paced in every single way, and when you're between evenly encounters, sometimes you want to mooch at a decent pace. It's there for you to do, but minor collisions can dismount you from your horse at random, and other times you'll just be redirected where you need to go. Accidentally bumping into somebody might result in you getting shot at, and then defending yourself only to get a bounty. If your horse is next to another horse, attempting to mount it will result in you mounting the wrong horse, and in a built-up area that might go down as theft, resulting in you getting shot at or punched. If you hang around in an area for a second too long, such as a sheriff's office or a random camp you're just passing by, things might escalate to either receiving a bounty or getting shot at, or you'll be in a position again where defending yourself amasses a bounty. And considering the gameplay can be a little bit on the clumsy side, sometimes you just can't win. Sometimes minor events or blips just become big events, meaning that though the game is ordinarily incredibly immersive and atmospheric, it can also be massively comedic. And now we can talk about the cut content. The cut content clearly suggests Arthur's story was longer, and a lot of side content is built on the framework of the original concept versus what we actually got, which is probably why some side mission chains can be started by Arthur but can only be finished by John, which to me makes for rough continuity at the best of times. That said, in many mission chains that's addressed if you drop them midway through and complete the story, but it isn't always brought up, and when it is, it does feel like a plaster. There are other times though where the game does the opposite, giving you a side mission chain to complete as Arthur Morgan, only for that to be rewarded when you take the reins as John Marston 8 years later and re-encounter that character for a unique interaction in which both characters remember Arthur. When it works excellently, and when it doesn't, the epilogue can get a little bit daft when exploring the open world. In truth, I feel as if the best approach is to do as much of the side content as Arthur Morgan before you get to the end of the game, so that when you've completed the epilogue, that can mark the end of the story. But of course it would have been nice to see much more content unique to John at the very end. As you can tell, I had to reach rather far for those negatives. When you think long and hard, there are ways that Red Dead Redemption 2 could have pushed itself further, yes, but largely the game didn't need it to thrive. It already does. Yes, there are aspects to the open world of this game that I simply don't wish to engage in. Collectibles are dependent on what value I see in them for sure. I don't really enjoy the fishing. I like that it's there, but I won't go doing that much. Nor do I really enjoy the hunting challenges all that much, so I'll never 100% this game for as long as I live, but I always come away from a playthrough feeling fulfilled and happy in what I did bother to do, which is often an awful lot of what's on offer, especially now that I know where to look for it all. Even then, it's nice that random encounters are harder to predict. They're far more reliable than other games, but I think that might be another point of critique depending on how you like to approach exploration in games. To me, it's an illusion anyway. Exploration in games isn't that real, it's all made by somebody, so I don't care how scripted it is or isn't, how reliably something can be incurred, as long as it feels well placed and satisfies my desire for the world to feel alive, I'm happy as can be. Even then, Red Dead Redemption 2 can throw some curveballs, encounters that refuse to spawn for several playthroughs before suddenly just emerging from the depths of the game's code. And that's an issue probably exclusive to a content creator trying to do a video about a specific thing. The truth is, how Red Dead Redemption 2 constructs its world ensures replay value. After several playthroughs, there are still things to explore and enjoy that you might not have found yet. There's so much to remember about a playthrough that the vast majority will be forgotten, only to be re-experienced, and maybe you'll happen upon a new detail the second time that went straight over your head the first. The game doesn't necessarily do anything groundbreaking in truth. It isn't innovative as such, but rather takes what's possible and turns it into a convincingly crafted, well-reasoned world in which things happen not at random but in rhythm, to ensure that even though you need a stomach for slow pacing to really appreciate it, there's always something to keep you distracted, and when that's not needed, involved, and that can be anything from the random encounters and points of interest to the simple survival elements that require you to keep Arthur and his horse fed, in good health and clean. It's nice. This is a game that masters ensuring player engagement in single player because it does it in a way that feels natural and worthwhile, so with that in mind, it's an absolute mystery as to why they didn't do that with Red Dead Online to anywhere near this extent. In my mind, Red Dead Redemption 2's open world is my favourite open world game. I don't like calling it my favourite game of all time because I feel as if that's a bit of a dull answer, but the reality is the single player anyway absolutely is that good. The open world alone keeps drawing me back to it. I keep finding myself enjoying just being a part of what Red Dead Redemption's universe has to offer storytelling-wise on various levels, to the extreme. Sure, cut content trimmed back some of the more interesting experiences that you could have had, but that doesn't necessarily take away from what's still there. So to wrap up this ramble, poorly disguised as an essay, 5 years on, Red Dead Redemption 2's open world is still just as immersive as it ever was. It's not a game that boasts the best gameplay ever, it just doesn't, but it is remarkably in touch with what an open world is, or at least should be. It's not a senselessly massive map packed with collectibles and side missions and very little else to draw you in. There are endless amounts of layers of content, experiences and moments to be had when riding across this fictional parody version of several American states that satisfy an entire spectrum of tones and interests. The game delivered on its intent to stay with the player for years to come, at least in my case and I'm sure many others, and firing it up even now still provides that exact same sensation. It's a satisfying comfort game in which one must really take their time to truly appreciate, and that's easier when it sounds when the game encourages you to do that. I have played this game through a fair few times, often without deviating much as far as the honour is concerned, and excluding the train wreck that was Red Dead Online, I haven't regretted a single second. I've had some incredibly fond memories of this game that have been imprinted into my mind over the past 5 years, and who knows, though I doubt it, maybe it has more surprises in store for me yet. And that's all there really is to say. Thank you all for watching this video. I'm aware it's a bit of a bumbling slog, but I wanted to ramble and show my appreciation for this game even 5 years down the line. And I wanted to talk about the aspect in particular that drew me to this game, or at least kept drawing me back to it after I'd finished the main story. and that was, of course, the open world. Like I said, it's hardly without flaws, but it is, at least to me, one of the greatest out there. It has something for you at every turn, and when I say that I mean it earnestly, and in my opinion that's not something enough games out there do to this level. I'm sure there are others that some might argue to be better than this, but by and large there are many open world games out there that don't truly understand what an open world should mean, and they can often be exhausting and cheapening to the intended effect. And when I think about the core idea of how I like open world games being handled, this is the game that crops up time and time again. Anyway, I shan't chew your ears off anymore. If you enjoyed this video, please like and maybe hit subscribe, share the channel with your friends if you fancy it, but with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, so until next time, take care and goodbye.